The hum of the engine was a familiar lullaby as I turned onto our street, the setting sun casting long orange shadows across the neat lawns. It had been a particularly grueling day at the office, a marathon of meetings and spreadsheets, and all I craved was the quiet comfort of home. The thought of Alara, my wife, and our spirited 5-year-old daughter, Lily, was the only thing that had kept me going. I pictured Alara's warm smile, Lily's excited squeals as she recounted her day, the aroma of whatever delicious dinner Alara had conjured up. It was my sanctuary, my refuge from the chaos of the world. But as I pulled into the driveway, something felt off. The usual vibrant energy that spilled from our home was absent. The front door was slightly ajar, which was unusual for Alara, who was meticulously careful about security. A prickle of unease started at the back of my neck. I cut the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the growing apprehension within me. I stepped out, the gravel crunching under my shoes, and pushed the front door open wider. "Alara? Lily? I'm home!" My voice, usually booming with cheerfulness, sounded strangely muted in the quiet house. No joyous rush, no little feet thudding across the hardwood, just an unnerving stillness. I walked into the living room, my heart beginning to quicken its pace. And then I saw her. Alara was curled up on the sofa, a small, crumpled figure, her face buried in her hands. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs that tore at my soul. My breath hitched. This wasn't Alara. My Alara, strong and resilient, the woman who faced every challenge with grace and a fierce determination, was utterly broken. Her usually vibrant auburn hair was disheveled, clinging to her tear-streaked face. The air around her felt heavy, thick with a palpable sorrow. "Alara, what happened? Are you okay?" I rushed to her side, dropping my briefcase with a thud that echoed in the quiet room. I knelt before her, trying to gently pull her hands away, my mind racing through 1,000 worst-case scenarios. Had there been an accident? Was someone hurt? "Talk to me, honey, please." She finally lifted her head, her eyes swollen and red, her cheeks blotchy. A raw, guttural sound escaped her lips, a broken whimper that twisted my gut. She tried to speak, but only choked sobs came out. Her gaze was distant, unfocused, as if she were reliving some horror. It was a look I'd never seen on her face, a look of profound violation and despair. Just then, Lily padded into the room, her small face etched with confusion. She clutched her favorite teddy bear, Mr. Snuggles, and her big, innocent eyes darted between her mother and me. "Daddy, why is Mommy crying?" Her voice was a soft, bewildered whisper, and it was like a knife to my heart. How do you explain such raw pain to a child? How do you shield her from a world that could inflict such hurt? I scooped Lily up, holding her close, trying to project a calm I didn't feel. "Mommy's just a little sad, sweetie. We'll make her feel better, okay?" I stroked Alara's arm, my touch gentle, but my mind was a storm of questions. Who could have done this? What could possibly have reduced my strong, beautiful wife to such a state? My protective instincts flared, a primal anger beginning to simmer beneath my worry. Alara eventually managed to point a trembling finger towards the kitchen. The garden," she choked out, her voice barely audible. "My roses." My heart sank. Alara's rose garden was her pride and joy, her sanctuary. She spent hours tending to it, nurturing each bloom with a love that bordered on obsession. It wasn't just a garden, it was a testament to her patience, her creativity, her connection to nature. To see it damaged would be devastating, but this level of anguish suggested something far more insidious than a simple accident or a stray ball. I handed Lily over to Alara, who, despite her own distress, instinctively wrapped her arms around our daughter. "Stay with Mommy, sweetie," I murmured to Lily, then turned towards the kitchen, a cold knot forming in my stomach. I walked through the kitchen, my gaze drawn to the back door, which was also slightly ajar. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just about roses. This felt like a violation. Stepping out into the backyard, the vibrant colors of Alara's meticulously arranged flower beds usually greeted me with a burst of life. Today, a scene of utter devastation lay before me. The air itself seemed to hum with the lingering scent of crushed petals and disturbed earth. Her prize-winning hybrid tea roses, the ones she had carefully cultivated for years, were not just damaged, they were systematically decimated. Stems were snapped, petals scattered like confetti after a cruel party, and the rich, dark soil was churned up, as if someone had deliberately tried to uproot the very essence of her joy. It wasn't random, it was malicious. Each broken stem, each torn leaf seemed to scream of a deliberate act of destruction. My eyes burned with a fury I rarely allowed myself to feel. This wasn't just vandalism. It was an attack on Alara's soul. I stood there, fists clenched, trying to piece together what could have happened. There were no signs of forced entry on the back door itself, but the fact that it was open and the garden so thoroughly ruined suggested someone had been here. My gaze drifted upwards to the small, discreet security camera mounted under the eaves of the house. A wave of cold resolve washed over me. The camera, of course. It covered the entire backyard and the back door. It would have seen everything. I rushed back inside, the image of Ilara's shattered face and Lily's innocent confusion burning in my mind. I found them still on the couch, Ilara holding Lily tightly, her tears now a silent stream. "I'm going to check the cameras, Ilara," I said, my voice low and steady, trying to convey a sense of control I didn't entirely possess. She nodded, her eyes still clouded with pain, but a flicker of something, perhaps a desperate hope, passed through them. My home office, usually a haven of quiet productivity, felt like a war room as I powered on the computer and accessed the security footage. My fingers trembled slightly as I navigated through the interface, selecting the backyard camera feed. I fast-forwarded through the early afternoon hours, seeing only the gentle swaying of leaves and the occasional bird flitting across the frame. I watched the timestamp tick by, my heart pounding in my chest, a terrible anticipation building. Then, at precisely 2:47 p.m., the screen showed movement, a figure. My blood ran cold. It was Sarah Jenkins, our next-door neighbor. Sarah was, in a word, a piece of work. She was the kind of person who always had to one-up everyone, whose compliments were backhanded, and whose entire existence seemed dedicated to maintaining a pristine facade while subtly undermining anyone she perceived as a threat. She had a perfectly manicured lawn, a perfectly coordinated wardrobe, and a perfectly insincere smile. Ilara and I had always tried to be cordial, but her passive-aggressive jabs about Ilara's overly ambitious gardening or unconventional artistic pursuits had always grated on us. She'd always seemed to view Ilara's success and happiness, particularly with her garden, as a personal affront. Lately, she'd been campaigning hard for a position on the local community board, plastering her face on flyers around the neighborhood, promising to bring order and aesthetic excellence to our quaint suburb. Watching the footage, I saw Sarah approach our back fence, her head swiveling furtively, checking if anyone was around. She was wearing gardening gloves, which struck me as odd, as her own pristine garden was on the other side of her house. She then, with a shocking casualness, unlatched the small gate that separated our properties, a gate we only ever used with mutual permission, which was rarely given or sought. She stepped onto our property, a smirk playing on her lips, a glint of malicious satisfaction in her eyes. My stomach churned. This wasn't an accident. This was premeditated. She walked directly towards Ilara's rose garden, her movements deliberate, almost performative. She didn't hesitate. She didn't look remorseful. With a chilling calm, she reached down, grabbed a handful of Ilara's most cherished rose bushes, and snapped the stems with a sickening crunch. Then another, and another. She wasn't just breaking them, she was tearing them apart, pulling out entire sections by the roots, scattering the soil with a malicious glee. It was brutal, systematic destruction. She even took a small trowel from her pocket and began to dig, not to plant, but to uproot and fling the dirt with a vindictive flourish. My vision blurred with a red haze of pure, unadulterated rage. I watched, horrified, as she continued her rampage for what felt like an eternity, though the timestamp indicated only a few minutes. She took obvious pleasure in the destruction, occasionally glancing back at our house, her expression a mix of triumph and contempt. It was clear she knew Alara was likely home, or at least nearby. This wasn't just about the roses. It was about making Alara feel powerless, about invading her safe space and destroying something she loved deeply. It was a calculated act of cruelty. Then the worst part. Alara appeared in the frame, drawn out by the sounds. She had been in her art studio, lost in her work, and had only just realized the commotion. Her face, initially curious, twisted into an expression of utter disbelief, then dawning horror. She gasped, a sound I couldn't hear but could clearly read on her lips, and took a step forward, her hand flying to her mouth. Sarah, seeing Alara, didn't flinch. Instead, she paused, looked Alara directly in the eye, and with a slow, deliberate motion, snapped the stem of Alara's prize-winning blushing pink rose, the one Alara had been cultivating for a major local flower show. It was a gesture of pure, unadulterated spite. Then, with a final triumphant glare, Sarah tossed the broken stem at Alara's feet, turned, and calmly walked back through the gate, latching it behind her, as if she'd merely been admiring her own garden. Alara stood there for a long moment, frozen, tears streaming down her face, her hands shaking. She slowly sank to her knees amidst the wreckage of her beloved garden, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The camera captured it all, the injustice, the pain, the complete and utter devastation. That was when Lily had likely come out to see what was happening, only to find her mother in that state. I slammed my fist on the desk, the sound echoing sharply in the small office. My breathing was ragged, my jaw tight. This wasn't just property damage. This was a personal assault, a deliberate act of psychological torment. Sarah had not only destroyed Alara's garden, but had also stolen her peace, her sense of security, and left her utterly vulnerable. The rage that had been simmering now boiled over, a cold, hard fury that demanded retribution. I walked back into the living room, the laptop still open in my hand, the damning footage playing on a loop. Alara looked up, her eyes still red-rimmed, but now with a fragile hope. Lily was asleep in her arms, exhausted by the day's emotional turmoil. "I saw it, Alara," I said, my voice low and tight with suppressed anger. I saw everything. It was Sarah. A fresh wave of tears welled in Alara's eyes, but this time it was different. It wasn't just sadness. It was a realization, a validation of her pain. I couldn't believe it," she whispered, her voice still hoarse. "She just stood there and watched me, and then she broke the blushing pink, the one for the show." Her voice trailed off, the injustice still fresh. "She's going to pay for this," I stated, the words a solemn vow. "She's going to pay for every single tear you've shed, for every broken rose, for every moment of peace she stole from you." Alara looked at me, a flicker of fear in her eyes. "What are you going to do? I don't want trouble, honey. We just want to move on." "Moving on isn't forgetting, Alara, and it's certainly not letting her get away with this," I said. "This isn't about trouble. This is about justice. This is about protecting our home, our family, and your peace of mind. She targeted you, Alara. She thought she could get away with it because she's Sarah, the perfect neighbor. But the camera never lies." I spent the rest of the evening brainstorming, the laptop with the footage still open beside me. Calling the police felt like an option, but I knew how these things often went. Property damage, a slap on the wrist, maybe a fine. Sarah would deny everything, play the victim, and continue her subtle campaign of malice. No, this required something more. Something that would hit her where it truly hurt: her meticulously crafted reputation, her social standing, her ambition to be on the community board. She thrived on appearances, on being seen as the benevolent, upstanding citizen. That's what I would target. I meticulously edited the footage, creating a concise, damning video. I added timestamps, zoomed in on her face, on her deliberate actions, on the moment she looked Alara in the eye and snapped the final rose. I even added a title card: "The True Face of Sarah Jenkins, a Neighbor's Cruelty Unmasked." My plan began to take shape. Sarah was holding a major Meet the Candidates fundraiser at her house the following Saturday, a grand affair she had been promoting for weeks, designed to showcase her impeccable hospitality and community spirit. It was the perfect stage. I reached out to a few trusted neighbors, people I knew had also experienced Sarah's subtle toxicity or had seen through her facade. Mr. Henderson, a retired police officer, had always been wary of her. Mrs. Rodriguez, whose cat Sarah had once accidentally locked in her garage for a day, harbored a quiet resentment. I showed them the footage, explaining Alara's distress. Their reactions were a mixture of shock and disgust. "I knew she was a snake," Mr. Henderson muttered, his jaw tight, "but this is beyond the pale." Mrs. Rodriguez simply shook her head, her eyes flashing with anger. They agreed to help. Over the next few days, I worked quietly, almost stealthily. I printed out flyers, not with Sarah's face, but with a QR code and a short, intriguing message. "Curious about your community board candidate? Scan for the truth." I made sure they looked official, almost like a campaign ad. My goal wasn't to vandalize, but to expose. I also created an anonymous social media account, linking to the video, and started subtly sharing it within local neighborhood groups, framing it as important information for voters. I ensured the video was downloadable and easily shareable. On the day of Sarah's fundraiser, the air was buzzing with anticipation. Her house was adorned with balloons and banners, a stark contrast to the quiet devastation in our own backyard. Cars lined the street, and a steady stream of well-dressed guests flowed into her meticulously manicured property. Alara, though still fragile, had a quiet determination in her eyes. She hadn't asked me to stop, seeing the cold resolve in my own. She knew this wasn't just about revenge, but about reclaiming her peace. Lily was at her grandmother's, safely away from the unfolding drama. My part of the plan was simple. As guests arrived, Mr. Henderson and Mrs. Rodriguez, along with a few other sympathetic neighbors, discreetly placed the flyers on car windshields and slipped them into mailboxes, blending in with the general hubbub. The QR code led directly to the video. I, meanwhile, kept a low profile, watching from our living room window. Within an hour, I started to see the first signs. People, now inside Sarah's party, were pulling out their phones, scanning the codes. Whispers started, heads turned, frowns replaced smiles. A few guests, their faces pale with disbelief, started making their way out of the party, casting disgusted glances back at Sarah's house. Sarah, oblivious at first, was holding court on her front porch, charming potential voters with her practiced smile. But as more and more people started leaving, and the whispers grew louder, her smile began to falter. She noticed the phones, the hushed conversations, the increasingly uncomfortable atmosphere. Then, one of her campaign volunteers, a young woman who looked utterly mortified, rushed up to her, holding out a phone with the video playing. Sarah's face, usually so composed, crumpled. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking ashen. Her eyes, wide with horror, darted towards our house, then back to the phone. The perfectly curated facade shattered, revealing the ugly truth beneath. The party, which had been so lively moments before, dissolved into a chaotic exodus. People were openly discussing the video, their voices no longer hushed. "Did you see what she did to Alara's garden? And the way she looked at her, pure evil. And she wants to be on the community board? Absolutely not." By the time the sun began to set, Sarah's grand fundraiser was a ghost town. The balloons drooped, the banners looked forlorn, and the silence that descended upon her house was deafening. Her political ambitions, her carefully constructed image, her entire social standing were utterly demolished. The video, now viral within the neighborhood, was spreading like wildfire. She was exposed, publicly and undeniably. I watched it all unfold, a grim satisfaction settling in my chest. It wasn't about vengeance for vengeance's sake. It was about righting a wrong, about protecting the woman I loved, and about ensuring that maliciousness didn't go unpunished. I walked over to Alara, who was now standing by the window, a small, almost imperceptible smile gracing her lips. The raw pain in her eyes had been replaced by a quiet strength. "Are you okay?" I asked, wrapping my arm around her. She leaned into my embrace, her head resting on my shoulder. "I'm okay," she whispered, her voice soft but clear. I think I can start planting again." And she did. Over the next few weeks, with my help and even a few genuinely kind neighbors offering their support, Alara began to rebuild her garden. The new roses she planted were a symbol of resilience, of beauty rising from the ashes of cruelty. Sarah, on the other hand, became a pariah. Her campaign was abandoned, her name a byword for hypocrisy and malice. She rarely left her house, and when she did, her eyes were downcast, unable to meet the gazes of her former admirers. The silence of her once bustling home was a constant reminder of her downfall. Our home, however, slowly but surely regained its warmth and vibrancy. Lily, oblivious to the full extent of the drama, saw her mother smiling again, saw the garden slowly coming back to life. The security cameras remained, a silent sentinel, a reminder that while darkness might lurk, truth and justice, with a little strategic planning, would always prevail. And sometimes, the best revenge isn't loud or violent, but a quiet, irrefutable exposure that leaves the perpetrator to face the consequences of their own actions, alone in the silence they created.